Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of The Democratic View. I'm Phyllis Italiano, and I'm the hostess of this show. And you know, we do a lot of shows about the issues that are facing East Hampton. And right now, I have a man who's going to talk about a very large issue located right over there, the airport. And his name is Charles Ehren, and he is the vice chairman of the Quiet Skies Coalition. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
And we're going to start with you telling me a little bit about you before we go on to the issue.
Well, I was a New York City kid. I was born on Staten Island, went to public schools there, met my wife there, went to college and law school in the city also, Columbia, and practiced law for a number of years in a large Wall Street law firm where I did work on natural resources matters, electric utilities. We did a lot of work for a lot of electric utility companies around the country, and that involved me in hydroelectric matters and atomic energy matters and water resources and that sort of thing. And I did that for several years. And
Boy, those are still hot things.
Oh, they are. And they taught me a lot about things that bear on what we're going to be talking about, which is the relationship between the federal government and state and local governments and their relative powers and whatnot. But anyway, after a few years of that, I jumped into Lyndon Johnson's poverty program. He'd started something called the Legal Services Program, which was part then of the Office of Economic Opportunity. I guess a lot of our younger viewers might not remember that expression, but OEO was the expression. And for a couple of years, I helped start and run a training program for young legal services lawyers. In those days, many young law school graduates were eager to do good. I hope they still, young law school graduates,
before
want to
money
do that.
bit them?
Well, and also before student loan debt
Yes.
put a cloud on some of these. Anyway, they would jump in with not very much experience in the world, and so we ran a program to train them. And of course, the aim of that legal services program and our training was to set up legal offices that would provide the same kind of quality of services to poor people that I was used to when I was in the Wall Street practice.
Oh.
Real quality law,
Right.
group practices, and we involved them not only in individual family court things and housing matters and whatnot, but in lobbying for changes in the law. We did a lot of work in social welfare. The welfare law was started in 1935 with the Social Security Act, and it provided certain benefits and provided rights to people who didn't think they were getting their benefits when they should, but they had no lawyers representing them. So until about 1970, as a result of the legal services program and allied interests, there were no lawyers representing them. And so effectively the law wasn't applied. And we did a lot of work in that area. Mm-hmm. That too, of course, was a matter of federal law as it related to local government and state law and so forth. So then I went into law teaching, and I taught at several law schools, and I served as dean in a couple of places. And actually that all started around 1967. Which is also the time that my wife and I started coming out to the East End for our vacations.
Aha.
And so anyway, over a period of 30 years, we moved around the country from university to university. My wife started out in elementary education, and she moved around the country with me and picked up a PhD along the way and ended up in higher ed. So she served as associate dean at a college and did fundraising and so forth too. But anyway, for our summers, most summers, starting in 1967, we came out here. And so when we started looking toward retirement, we bought some property up in Northwest Woods, and in 1997, we retired, and we built our house, and we're living there ever since. And we got out here just in time to, well, I guess it was a couple of years. You may recall the controversy back around 1999 over the problems that occurred at Sammy's Beach.
I don't remember.
Well, Sammy's Beach is a town preserve.
Yes, I do know that.
And dredging had to be done. It's at the edge of 3 Mile Harbor.
Yes.
Dredging had to be done. It was long overdue to clear the entrance to the harbor. And unfortunately, although the town is responsible for running the harbor, it's the county that, at least in those days, was responsible for the dredging. And in spite of years of lobbying by the town, the dredging never got done. So it's a serious thing. When the county finally got around to doing it, their engineers decided they would dump the spoil from the dredging onto Sammy's Beach.
Oh,
and that was a very large controversy. And so we're in Settlers Landing, which was nearby there, and we got involved with an ad hoc group that was protesting that work, and that over a period of time, with Kathy Lester and later with Jay Schneiderman as supervisor, I should say, we got a program going to restore Sammy's Beach. That got me involved in local affairs.
So that was the thing,
yeah.
That was the hook
Well,
that got you involved with paying attention to what goes on in your community and working for the benefit of the community.
For many years, as I mentioned before, I was involved in natural resources law. So
right.
In my teaching,
right.
I was involved in that also. But I never was involved in an actual on the road, on the street movement, so to speak. So my wife and I got our real first experience out of the ivory tower onto local politics and all of that. I became vice president of our local Property Owners Association, and around, I think, perhaps the year 2000 or 2001, an ad hoc group interested in noise at the airport got together with a number of civic organizations and property owners organizations to try to put together a force that would fight that noise for the protection of the peace and quiet that we all came out here for.
Yes, tell me about it.
I mean, as I said, in 1967, my wife and I started coming out here, and we chose to retire here because of all the places we'd been. What we liked, we spent time in Colorado. We loved the hills of Colorado. That would have been nice to retire, but there was nothing that competed for us for the peace and quiet and just quality of life, if you will, here at the East End.
When you are looking out over a vista of flat land, meeting the sky and that horizon.
Indeed.
And then there's a little bit of water over there too. I mean, it's thrilling.
And also the quiet scenes in the woods and
yes.
the quiet.
Yes.
The quiet.
Absolutely.
That was one of the
I
leading
know.
things.
I sometimes say that on my street you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
You know, it can be that quiet.
So
sometimes.
Yes. So when that ad hoc group out of civic associations got formed, the purpose was to try to lobby the town, which is the owner of the airport,
yes,
to do something.
East Hampton
this
owns the airport.
And
bottom line.
This was long before the helicopter issue, which is the thing that most people talk about now. In any event, I was vice president of our Property Owners Association. I became the delegate to that ad hoc group. And after that group lobbied a couple of administrations to really come to grips with airport noise. I think it was at the beginning, really, of the McGuinty administration, finally. And Bill had a lot of troubles toward the end of his term, but one of the great things he did was to create something called the Airport Noise Abatement Advisory Committee, which was created to represent the interests of those who were seeking reasonable regulation and limitation on noise. And I was appointed to that committee because I'd been involved in the lobbying group that had called for its existence. It was really designed to be a committee that would counteract the airport interests, which are well organized, and have their own association. It's called the East Hampton Aviation Association.
Yes, it is.
And it's a very, very powerful, politically powerful group.
And moneyed.
Yes. Well, the two go together, don't they, normally?
Yes, they do.
Anyway, so I served on that committee, and that's where I met Kathy Cunningham. She ultimately served as chair of that, and I became vice chairman of that committee, which was an advisory committee to the town. And we worked for several years under the McKinney administration and at the beginning of the Wilkinson administration. And early on, we think we can fairly take credit for getting the town to appoint a noise abatement officer, an assistant to the manager. They put it on the budget, and they hired somebody. And we were also around at the time when the current manager was hired. We thought that he was a good hire at the time. And we tried to support him in all of his efforts to take control of noise. Then, of course, when the Wilkinson administration came in, our airport liaison became Councilman Stanzione. And he came to our meetings regularly for that. We have to give him credit. But ultimately, he didn't like what he was hearing from us. And I think in the beginning of January of 2011, I think it was, 2 years ago, he just summarily ended our committee. He created some sort of multi-town committee that was going to address helicopter noise. And there was no more need for our committee, because our committee wasn't interested only in helicopters. We had got started because people were interested in jets that fly in low over East Hampton Village, jets that take off at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Near my house.
Yeah, yeah.
And I live in the Springs, and I hear them at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Of course. And at that time, training programs, where a learning aviator comes down to the ground, lands quickly and takes off again and circles and comes down, that became an annoyance to people closer to the airport. You know, taking off and landing and taking off and touch and goes, they were called. Those were big things before people got upset with the helicopters. Anyway, a lot of those things are still there, although they don't get the publicity that the helicopters do. In any event, Mr. Stanzione killed our committee, which was an official committee, and set up his own group, which he claims has been doing good work. That, I think, is doubtful. But anyway, after that committee, official advisory committee was killed, not a political committee. An advisory committee to the town does not have any authority to go out and lobby or politic or anything like that. We were strictly advisory, and we were advisory to Mr. Stanzione. As I said, he didn't like what he was hearing from us. But after we were summarily put to death as a committee, several of us thought we then ought to become political. And after a couple of months, we got together with some other people of similar intent and formed the Quiet Skies Coalition in August of, I think, 2011. Now, I may say the Airport Noise Abatement Advisory Committee, the official committee that was originally appointed, included citizens not only from East Hampton, but also from Southampton, because it was recognized that this is a regional problem. It's not one community against another.
So what I'm going to ask you
I just want to get the group that put together Quiet Skies also represents both towns, all the interested parties.
Well, what I wanted to understand is apparently, because a lot of people will say, well, if you don't like the noise, why did you buy a house? To those people who do live near the outskirts of the airport, why did you buy a house there? Of course, obviously, to me, the answer is that it was a little bit of an airport at that time when they bought the house, and then it became a regional big airport.
Yes,
you
indeed.
know, so that the airport grew way before these poor people who are left here with all of this noise.
Yes. When we were on the advisory committee that I mentioned, Kathy and I, we were aiming to get noise, the word was abatement, noise abated to the degree that it existed in around 1990.
Yes.
Because in 1990, the feeling was mostly small planes, local pilots, and so forth, and the noise was not a significant matter. You talk about why did you buy in? One of our members is a person from an old family who lives in a house that his in-laws had here 300 years ago.
Oh, God.
Okay? And he's bothered by the noise.
Oh, well.
So, I mean, that's an extreme answer to your
Well,
your question,
I know. I recently wrote a letter after I watched one of the town board meetings in which there were people from the North Fork.
Indeed.
There were people from all over the East End
Yes.
complaining about the noise from East Hampton's airport.
Yes.
And I thought, well, how dare we?
Yes.
How dare we infringe upon all of these people and their life and their style of living? I mean,
that's
that
right.
just simply isn't fair.
And it was that issue that you mentioned was exacerbated last year, in August of last year, when Mr. Stanzione again arranged for one of the helicopter flight routes that was going over Northwest in East Hampton, for most of that traffic to be diverted over Southampton. In other words, dumping our noise into our neighbors' backyards. And that, of course, is a big issue now, how to rearrange these helicopter routes. But, of course, there are more and more helicopters.
Well, as a matter of fact, my friend out here, Lena, who is our technician, was telling me that on her way here on 114, there was an airport, a helicopter that came down so low over her that she just really was astounded at the amount of noise that they make.
And for people who are under the regular routes, it can be every 5 or 10 minutes for hours at end during the height of the season.
That's what she was telling me. Her aunt lives in, I don't know, Mauritius or something like that. And you know, she was telling me that she, all summer long, it's like, I mean, they're not right over her house, but she hears them anyway, like every 10 minutes. And it really has become quite a problem.
Well, anyway, now Mr. Stanzione is involved in trying to rearrange routes. He wants to satisfy people by spreading the noise. Well, Quiet Skies takes the position that spreading the noise around is not a solution, particularly if you don't do anything to keep the noise, the amount of traffic from increasing, which it has. Now, the airport interest will tell you correctly that since about 2007 to 2008, the actual amount of traffic, all air traffic, has gone down, probably because of the recession. We don't know. But they suggest that goes contrary to a 20-year history of the traffic going up and up and up and up. And we don't think that's sound advice because of the history, and also because of the efforts that are made to increase the capacity of the airport. The airport interests keep saying we want a small and safe airport. Well, the safe airport, they talk about the tower that was put in last year, and now they're trying to make it permanent. When we worked on the Airport Noise Abatement Advisory Committee, we were told by the airport manager and by everybody that, yes, this is an important safety feature, but it will have significant side effect of helping to minimize noise. Well, that turned out not to be true at all.
Nobody asked the question of how it would abate the noise?
Well, you would get this answer and that answer and the other answer, but the lie was put to that before it ever opened last July. On the 28th, I think it was, of June last year, there was the FAA had a seminar at the airport for local people to explain what the control tower was going to do. And the two leading controllers who were hired to run the control tower announced noise was not an issue. Their purpose, and this is legitimate and correct, their purpose is safety and efficiency. And of course, the history of last summer demonstrated that their work had nothing to do with relieving anybody of noise. Interestingly, it was simultaneously that Mr. Stanzione switched traffic away from Northwest in East Hampton over to Southampton and Noyac, so that there are a few people in Northwest, and I'm in Northwest. I wasn't quite directly under the route, but there are people in Northwest who had a better summer last year. So simultaneously, this is the kind of games that are played. They can tell a few people in East Hampton that their helicopter noise has been reduced, but it's not because of the tower. Indeed, the tower, as a very legitimate safety mechanism, really makes it safer for more traffic to come in. So it really is. It really is leads to the potential for increased traffic, even though the airport people can say, "Oh, we're not expanding the airport. All they're expanding is the traffic." And very recently, on a different front, I've heard stories that somebody is planning to start a seaplane shuttle from the airport to Montauk. That's just one small example of the kind of expansion that we might expect. In any event, I talked before about federal government, local government, state government. The question of the town imposing, and when I say imposing, I mean having the authority to enforce noise limits, really is a very complicated matter that it's very difficult to most folks to understand. Everybody knows about interstate commerce, and everybody knows that Congress can impose rules on interstate commerce. And we also know that there's something in the Constitution called the Supremacy Clause, so that if Congress, acting within its authority, makes a rule, the state and local government can't contradict it.
I hear one right now.
Yes. I know where the microphone's picked up.
I hear it.
But so you start out with that proposition that Congress has this authority. And of course, aviation is a function of interstate commerce. And so Congress, I guess back in the 20s or 30s, created the aviation system, control system that we have now, and delegated authority to the Federal Aviation Administration to run it. So everything that goes on in the air, certainly everything above about 500 feet, people will talk about that number, but it's controlled. Yes.
Well, if there are planes
Right.
up there, there's got to be somebody
Now,
telling them, don't go here, go there.
So as a result of the Supremacy Clause in the Constitution, that rule of law and that delegation to the FAA has created what the lawyers call a federal preemption. In other words, it's preempted from state and local government from interfering with that set of regulations. Okay? So the primary regulator and controller of aviation in the United States is the FAA. There's no question about that. Yeah. The state of New York can't interfere with it, and the town of East Hampton, as an arm of the state of New York, can't interfere with it. However, the federal statute has one, maybe several exceptions, but one exception, which allows municipal owners of airports to impose reasonable and non-discriminatory limits on access to their airports for noise prevention, for noise control. They've got to be reasonable, non-discriminatory, and what reasonable means is that you have to demonstrate that there's a noise problem, so that if you're limiting the access of aircraft to the airport to limit that noise, that there's a good reason for it. And that law has been upheld as recently as 1998 by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, right here. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals is the court just below the level of the Supreme Court, and it's divided into circuits in the United States. There are 12 or 13 of them. The Second Circuit covers New York, covers East Hampton, and it was their rule that made clear the exception that I just described, that gives municipalities the authority to impose reasonable noise regulation.
So is that the impetus for this expensive noise study that they're supposed to be carrying on now? Is that what gave rise to that?
Well, there's one more piece of this puzzle that I have to tell you about. The FAA is also authorized by Congress to promote aviation, and promote means give away dollars. They can promote the construction of airports, okay? And when they subsidize airport construction or improvement, the owner of the airport enters into a contract with the FAA.
Yes.
It's a 20-year contract.
Yes.
And that's
longer than my marriages, I got to tell you that.
Well, that's too bad. But anyway, 20 years is too bad when among the provisions of the contract is a restriction on the local owner of the airport to impose what we would regard as reasonable restrictions. In other words, by taking the FAA money, the owner of the airport, if it's a municipal owner, gives away the property rights that it had in the exception that Congress put into the basic statute.
Well, and
okay?
that, Charles, is where we have to end because our time is up. I told you it would go fast.
Oh, my.
But that is the problem. The problem is that if we take the FAA money, we lose control.
Yes.
And I'm not going to even mention how many dollars we have already spent from our own money on the airport in lawyers' fees.
Well, the airport, we're off camera now?
We're over.
We're over.